But anyways, just super amazing, amazing wildlife and flowers and crazy mushrooms. We collected mushrooms at 16,000 feet, and as best as you know, and I'm a mycologist. As best as I could tell, this was one of the four highest mushroom collections ever made in history and documented. It was just really amazing. Every single day, it was like the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. But it was also very, very difficult. But so Richard turned the first year 72 years old and then 73 years old during the trek. So age doesn't necessarily have anything to do with it. And he was able to trek easier than me, and I'm 58. So, but it is difficult. You have to train for it and all of that sort of business. So this year they're going to Lang Tang, which is it's a shorter route, and he says it's less physically demanding. But anyways, they go to Lang Tang, and this is where the main mushroom scientist in Nepal, Shiva Devkota, does most of his research. So he's very familiar with this area, and he studies mushrooms, especially in this region, because there's so much diversity and this sort of thing. So if you do the Lang Tang track, I won't be able to make it because I'm leading some tour at the same time, but it's supposed to be pretty spectacular. So fingers crossed I'll do it the next year when I go. But yes. So different species, but you would see groups of mushrooms that you would expect to see in North America. So you would see species of Amanita and Boletus. We found, Himalayan king boletes that are different species than we have here or Europe, and Russulas and corals and all of the same groups, just different species because they do different things. There are certain groups that they have there that we don't have because they have different groups of trees. So, around here, the best mycorrhizal trees for looking for mushrooms are going to be oaks, right? So that's the genus Quercus. And in the oak family, you have the genus Quercus and Lithocarpus if you're in the West Coast, and Castanea, which is chestnut. And they have some other genera that we have in the New World. So they have like Castaneopsis and Castanioides, and those are basically types of oaks, and they have all kinds of mushrooms. But they will have some different groups that we don't have here because, again, that's a different group of trees over there. But otherwise, they look about the same, but they're not exactly the same. So the Amanitas we found were really incredible. If you see the movie, you'll get to see a lot of the mushrooms we were finding that were pretty astounding. So there were boletes with stems about as big around maybe as your finger, but that were like this tall. These super tall, like crazy lexinums that were like gray and black and really freaky. And we were running into a lot of people that live there. And do you eat mushrooms? And everybody eats mushrooms. What's your favorite mushrooms? And the stories were just the same as back here. So they like this type and that type, and like, yeah, we eat those in the New World. And what about some of these different boletes? Yeah, they like all the boletes, especially the lexinums and suillus, but peel the skin off. Otherwise, you can get a stomach upset. It was literally like talking to people in Europe or North America about what mushrooms they like. It was all the same groups and much the same way to prepare them as well. And they're really into eating mushrooms. So the tea houses and places we stopped, they were on the menu everywhere. And we collected our own and we ate them and made pizzas and stuff like that too, with yak milk cheese, which was pretty exciting. And yeah, it was a really, really cool trip. I loved it. And if you've never been to Kathmandu, the big city of Nepal, it is about the most amazing city there is. There's so much art and World Heritage sites and things to do. So we started out the very first day, once the whole group arrived and got rested up, we went to this big temple, the Swayambhanu temple, which is 1,500 years old. Can you imagine? In, there's 1,500 years that predates a lot of people, in this area. It was astounding. So a lot of really ancient things that were just amazing. So if you get the opportunity to go to Nepal, definitely go. Can't say enough about it. So in other news, if you didn't get a magazine from over there, the magazines I published, Fungi Magazine, they're free to take home. I don't have any of my new books to sell, but there's 2 example copies over there. Don't take those, and especially don't take the yellow one because that's not even mine. And I think there's a sign that says "Don't steal me." The Amanita books, I do have some copies of those for sale if you need one of those. And if you don't know Amanitas, this is ground zero for my favorite of all the group of Amanitas, the Lepidellas, those great big white ones that are shaggy and have like rooting stems and stuff. That's my favorite group, and this is where they live. And by the way, I'm Britt Bunyard. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief and publisher of Fungi Magazine. This is our 18th year in print. And I used to be an academic mycologist at a university. And for the last several years, I haven't been. That's basically what I've been doing is raising kids and writing books and stuff like that. Okay, so where we'll start tonight is basically where um, lots of different scientific magazines, not so scientific magazines, popular media, basically anything you read nowadays talks about problems with the environment, climate change, and forest fires everywhere. It's too hot for chanterelles and biodiversity loss, et cetera, et cetera. It's all pretty doom and gloom. And not to be outdone, Fungi Magazine a couple years ago had a special issue devoted to all of these topics. And there's no way in the back of the room you can read any of this text on here, and it doesn't really matter. The centerfold of this special topics issue had stories on all of these different things: biodiversity loss, overuse of pesticides, species going extinct, invasive species, droughts, fires, all of this sort of stuff. And that's what this around the perimeter of this centerfold shows. And throughout the issue, we had articles on scientists studying fungi to solve a lot of these problems, looking for fungi that can break down plastics and degrade petroleum, that can be used as controls for pests on plants without using pesticides, et cetera, post-fire restoration of forests, and on and on. So it's a very uplifting edition of Fungi Magazine. It was really quite popular too, because we had all of these really cool stories of people like quite literally trying to save the planet with fungi. So what could be more exciting than that? So that's where we are with this talk. A resilient planet needs fungi now. So that fungi can make for a more resilient planet. If you've been in this club for quite a while, you probably already know that. You know that fungi can break down material, organic matter, compost, etc., to build up soils. You might know about fungi that seem to be partners with plants and make plants grow better. You might know about fungi that grow on the surface of plants, maybe, and somehow prevent pathogens and pests from eating those plants. A lot of people know that, and we've known it for a long time. How the fungi do this, though, is what is the subject of study for a lot of people. What goes on chemically and allows some fungi to break down woody material, but for the vast majority of fungi, they can't do it. And what happens with fungi that grow on the surface of plants to somehow prevent pathogens from taking hold. So this is the area of a lot of different research, and I'll show you some of those stories tonight as well. But starting out, the very first slide and then the next couple of slides, because I've probably already lost your attention, we're bringing you back now by showing you morels. This siren song is wooing you back to reality, because really that's all you're thinking about. Sam mentioned morels at the beginning. You haven't heard a single thing I've said since then, because you keep thinking, morel, wait, did he say where the morels were? Did he mention a park? When are they coming out? What was the soil temperature? So, okay, so I'm bringing you back by showing you some morels. And it's a really exciting time for me to be a mycologist, because all of a sudden fungi are cool and mushrooms are cool, and a lot of people are getting involved. People are joining mushroom clubs like this and doing myco blitzes and going on INAT and posting their things and getting excited. A lot of clubs are doing DNA sequence analysis to help identify mushrooms and document what's in the forest. And this is all really, really cool. There's even more things to do. So I mentioned iNaturalist, which you probably know about. There's a site that's even older, Mushroom Observer. That's the one I use to post rare and strange and wondrous mushrooms and to get them identified, or I go on there to identify stuff for people. But both of these places are used by actual scientists to see what's out there across North America and all over the world, because there's not really that many academic mycologists that do research, but there's lots and lots of citizen scientists, thousands and thousands posting stuff. And so it's really all of a sudden has sped up the science of documenting what we have in environments, and not just mushrooms, but everything, and kind of getting a baseline before habitats get more and more dwindled and more simplistic, and we lose more and more species. So right now we're really just starting to get a handle on a lot of the organisms we have in our habitats around us. This club, the Georgia Mycological Association Society, this club is part of a nationwide, actually, sort of a continental-wide umbrella group known as NAMA, the North American Mycological Association. Georgia Mushroom Club, the official mushroom club of Georgia. The deep state mushroom club. I mean deep south. That, I actually didn't mean to say. It's just been on my mind so much. Like the Mushroom Club of Georgia and the rest of the South. That's the full name. MCG. So MCG is part of NAMA, and there's also another big umbrella group, the Mycological Society of America. This is the continental-wide group for academic mycologists of Canada and United States and Mexico, and people outside the U.S. can belong to it as well. And so they have their own conferences and things like that. I'm only pointing this out because I'm a member of both, and I'm the Mycological Society of America MSA's liaison with NAMA. So if you didn't know there was this position, there has been for many years, but the person really didn't do a whole lot. And since I'm in front of NAMA clubs all the time, the president decided this would be something good for me to mention that. There's other things that you can do and take part in. They have their own journals and newsletters. So if you really like geeking out on stuff, and especially if you want to get, kind of take your knowledge to a higher level, then maybe the MSA is for you. This year, the NAMA annual foray, it goes round robin around North America. It was out in the Pacific Northwest last year, but NAMA's annual foray this year will be in Vermont. And then the next year, it'll probably be in maybe the South or the Midwest or something like that. It moves around. Likewise, MSA's annual conference, where academic papers are presented in this sort of business, their annual conference this year will be in Madison, Wisconsin. So if you've never been there and want a good excuse to go, there you go. Other things that are exciting, I mentioned mycoblitzes. There's also Fundus, an agency that funds mycological research, especially for clubs and people doing small projects of DNA sequence analysis, et cetera, and they help you find grants. And there's all kinds of things as well. Does anyone know who the person is in this photo? I take pictures of people collecting mushrooms and looking excited all the time. So I don't know if you know who this person is. Sam and Cornelia, you know who this person is on the screen? This is a great writer if you don't have any books by her. This is Alison Pouliot. She's a world famous mycologist and mycological writer in Australia, and she and I are very good friends, so we hang out every year. This particular photo was last year. She was hanging out in Chicago with me in the Chicago Morton Arboretum, and you know how it is when someone from outside of your area comes and visits you, and they're like super excited about some weird tree or mushroom. You're like, dummy, that's a weed here. Let's go look for something exciting. Well, she was excited about these agaricus that were growing in the mulch at the place, and I'm like, seriously, this is everywhere. But she was thrilled. So I took a picture of her being thrilled. So, but it is really, really exciting and important to do these inventories of what we have now, and to just, we're still getting a handle on what's out in the environment. But I like to know a little bit more about what they're doing in the environment. So that's some of the stories tonight will be about that. And Sam had mentioned these morel forays in Wisconsin, where people would come and pick the morels, and Sam and Cornelia came up a couple times. This is my son at one of those events. And yeah, under this tree, there was something like 350 of these big yellow morels. And my son found the spot, young Bailey, and so he was really excited there. You'll probably see more of him tonight too. And he came down one year with me, and we hung out with this club. Okay, so and another picture of morels. So you notice there's different morels. This is morels from the Midwest that are yellow, and this is morel. This is a burn morel from out in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. So there's different types of morels. There's different types of amanitas, and et cetera. And so yeah, I'm more interested in ecological and evolutionary side of things. So what they're doing. And so this is a really good place to start. There's no group of mushrooms, even if you're a beginner in here, you for sure know about morels. You might not know about clitosebes and entalomas and stuff, but of course you have to know about morels. People have known about morels and looked for them for centuries. Before the United States, before Europeans came here. In Europe, they were collecting morels. They've been known forever. Lewis and Clark, when they went across the country, meeting up with native people showed them morels and they ate them. They hated them. They didn't have butter and salt, so they didn't like them at all. And they actually wrote that. Tastes terrible. So people have known about these things for a long time. So you would think something so common. Has anyone in here never seen a morel before? Okay, I'm not going to say whether I see hands or not, because you might be shunned by others in your club. But and not even like in a grocery store, dried in a packet. Okay, that yeah, that counts. That I just mean, have you seen one up close and personal? So yeah, they're quite common. You would think something so common for centuries, maybe millennia, that we would know everything about them, and especially these burn morels. Everybody has known forever that after a fire where there's forest, burn morels will come up. They've been known for so long in Europe that countries in Europe and towns and villages in Europe have special laws on the book that says you can't burn down the forest to cause this to happen next year. Yeah, not kidding. So you know, after a fire, there's going to be morels. Anyways, so people have asked me forever, and in fact, when I was a student, I was asking people all the time. So what causes this? And there's been all kinds of theories about, the heat of the fire releases nutrients in the soil that causes the spores to germinate, or the smoke in the atmosphere causes wind currents to change, and so that brings in spores that are already up in the atmosphere, and all kinds of different possible reasons. Believe it or not, the most well-known mushroom probably on the planet, um, how burn morels get here to this spot after a fire was only figured out just recently. And what the answer is, they didn't just get here; they were already there. So if you have a big fire in a forest near here, the chances are there will be burn morels there, even though maybe you've never seen burn morels in Georgia before. Maybe they've never ever been documented before. Last year, I was giving a talk about morels, and there was some burn morel pictures. I was giving this talk in Virginia, and so the Zoom questions all of a sudden were lighting up, and someone stopped me and said, "Hey, everybody's asking about burn morels. Do you think we have them here in Virginia?" And I'm like, well, "Of course you do. They're everywhere, but you won't see them unless there's a fire. The fungus is in the soil, but it won't go into sexual reproductive mode unless there's a fire." And so the guy then pointed out, oh, the reason everyone's asking is because we did have, for like the first time ever, a great big forest fire. And sure enough, this spring, people in the club, including Pat Mitchell, went to the spot where the fire was, and they documented burn morels for the first time ever in Virginia. So they didn't get there; they were already there. And in the upper Midwest, one time in the 90s, there was the only forest fire ever happened in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan. The very next year, guess what? The commercial mushroom pickers were expecting there to be morels, went there, and sure enough, they were not disappointed. Everyone was saying, we don't have burn morels in Michigan. They've never been seen here. People have lived here for 200 years. There were burn morels there. They were always there, but without a fire, fire is a part of their niche. They couldn't complete their life cycle. So pretty cool. The yeah, yeah. Yeah, I can believe that. I mentioned, in Europe, there's laws to prevent people from starting fires that are hundreds of years on the books. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's against the law to start a forest fire, and you could be fined to pay for all of the damage, which could be millions. So there's a lot of really good reasons not to let a fire get away from your forest. But that's always been a law. It's not a law now. It's always been the case. Store them up until the end, otherwise we'll never get through. Yeah. Yeah, just store them up. Yep. And I mean, people can email me. People email questions all the time too. So, anyways, so how did this come about that we discovered about? Oh, here comes one of the ads. The thing with the morels I mentioned is we've known about them forever, but it turns out a lot about morels, a lot about all the fungi, frankly. Turns out what we thought we knew just recently with new research, it turns out what we thought we knew ain't necessarily so. And that's one of the two main themes of this book. So there's a lot of brand new research in there about stuff that we thought we knew. Turns out stuff is still being discovered. And then also a lot of the fifth kingdom, the kingdom of fungi, is hidden in plain sight. So there'll be stories about fungi from all over the planet right now. Wouldn't it be great to go to Nepal to see them or Australia to see them? But there's a lot of equally bizarre, weird fungi right outside your door you don't even know about, and even in your house that do a lot of really weird things. So you don't necessarily have to travel so far to see them. A lot of things are hidden in plain sight, like the burn morels and their life cycle. So, anyways, the research to look into this again has been done just recently. Here's one paper that showed endophytism of these burn morels. So, what is endophytism? That means the fungus in this case. So, some morels definitely are saprobic and rot things, but some, it seems, are not saprobic, or at least not always saprobic. It seems some of them are endophytic. They live actually inside the tissues of the plants. So after the fire goes through and burns up everything, and even maybe burns up most or all of the tree, if the roots are underground and not burned up, the fungus then can come back out into the forest and make these fruit bodies that can also move around and help jumpstart other plants to get going. So this was one such paper on this. Another was by Brandon Matheny, who works at the University of Tennessee, looking at a number of different of these so-called fire-loving fungi, pyrophilous fungi, including this little guy here. So if you go out to one of these burn sites in the Rocky Mountains or something to pick burn morels and everyone's excited, you'll see these everywhere as well. Nobody bothers to pick them because they're really tiny. It's a little tiny cup. So it's somewhat related to a morel. It's a little tiny cup, and the forest will be carpeted with these. Has anyone ever been to a burn morel pick before? Did you see lots of these little dudes everywhere? Yeah, so you can see them on any given year, one or two. Once in a while, they'll have a fruit body poking up, but after fire, there'll be lots and lots of them. Geopixus carbonaria is this little guy, and we have them in the east as well. And so Brandon Matheny, University of Tennessee, was looking at some burn areas and found a number of different fungi that seem to be pyrophilous or fire-loving. And this paper that was published, he published a couple different papers. This one was called Where Are They Hiding? Testing the Body Snatchers Hypothesis of Pyrophilous Fungi. So the hypothesis was, again, that these fire-loving fungi don't move into an area after fire. They were already there waiting to come out after a fire. So to look for these things, they started extracting DNA from soil samples, et cetera, which you can do. And we're finding signs of these fungi in the soil, but they also did DNA sequence analysis of all of the plants there too. So they took little cuttings of root tips, pieces of the mosses, lichens, etc., and they were finding the DNA of these fungi in those plants as well. So that's where the fungi were hiding. They didn't come there after the fire. They weren't somehow still in the soil. They were hiding out actually inside the plants and came out. And so what's exciting about this is people that study post-fire restoration, after forest fire moves through, how to get plants back on the soil before the soil washes away, because it can be like totally barren, right? To get plants going onto the soil, we know that a lot of fungi partner with plants to give them a jump start and to help them get nutrients from the soil, etc. And maybe some of these fungi are key to this, and people are actually showing this. It's pretty cool. So the next slide just shows sort of this life cycle that the fungi hang out wherever they hang out, basically forever. After fire comes through, then they complete their life cycle. They emerge as fruit bodies and make spores and start the whole process over again. So it's a pretty neat thing, and again, hidden in plain sight. Here's another example of one of these pyrophilous fungi. And I have to mention there's pyrophilous plants too. In fire-prone areas of the world, there's several different types of plants that have co-evolved with fire and sort of use it to their advantage. They can either withstand the fire or somehow come back right after a fire, or maybe that's when they drop their seeds, and now all of their competitors have been burned up. So Florida slash pine is one type of a fire-loving tree. It has so-called serotinous cones. And these are cones that stay on the tree closed for years and years and years and don't open until a fire comes through. It melts the thick coating of wax off of the cones. And then after the fire goes away and it cools down, then the cones open up and drop seeds. And I'll show you a picture of a seedling of these guys. So this is sort of, they use the fire to their advantage. They've co-evolved with it. So this is another pyrophilous fungi. It's called the stonemaker mushroom, Lacocephalum mylidi. If you recall, just a few years ago, there were massive wildfires all around Australia. In fact, my partner and I, that's her name there. These are her photos. Pitta Baranski, she's a mycologist in Australia. Um, we were set to lead a micro tour to Southeast Australia and go in forests and look for mushrooms and drink Australian wine and all this sort of stuff. Well, once the fires hit, then of course our not only the habitat burned up, but the lodges we were going to stay in and everything burned up. So no tour there. But anyways, what happened was she was sending me these photos. Do you know about this mushroom, the stonemaker mushroom? And I'm like, yeah, of course I do. You won't find any photos on Mushroom Observer or iNaturalist. It's incredibly rare, but I had a section of it in the book that I was making at the time because it's so interesting. And these things are enormous. These tubers that they come from underground, that's about the size of a grapefruit or maybe a football. So these fruit bodies here are like the size of a big dinner plate. You can see one right there. That's her hand with this sclerotium sliced open. So the weird thing about this, Pitta was telling me that these mushrooms also are known as Aboriginal bread. These large underground tubers are starchy, and we don't know why, but a long time ago, before Europeans came to Australia, Aborigines knew when it was the season for these, and they'd actually purposely go looking for them with baskets and bring back lots and lots of them. They were a source of food for them, so they knew where and when to find them. And now nobody ever sees them at all. And so the reason for this is because their life cycle had been disrupted. The Aboriginals would light fires every year to burn up vegetation to spawn new growth of plants, which would bring in game and things. Native Americans did the same thing. And likewise, it would foster the growth of these really large mushrooms. I don't think people eat the mushrooms, but they do eat these large tubers underground. So this mushroom, super, super rare, barely known, almost no photos in existence up until just a few years ago. Then when these fires happened, you can see the forests were full of these. It was the mycologists couldn't believe what they were seeing because this thing was thought to be so rare. But it turns out it was everywhere. It's just that part of their life cycle couldn't happen because part of their niche wasn't there. Had to have fire periodically to form these fruit bodies. Okay, so after the fire goes away, some trees have these serotinous cones and drop seeds, and they get going. But for the most part, the forest looks like a lunar landscape, and it's looks quite sad. If you've been out west, every year when I go to the Telluride Mushroom Festival, I drive through areas like this that have burned every single year. There's a big burn. There's bark beetles that are killing the trees, and then the dead trees are basically firewood. So it's really sad. But this isn't actually the sad part yet. The sad part comes during rainy season when there's no plants on the soil and now the topsoil starts washing away. If this keeps happening enough times, eventually you don't have any topsoil, and now it's really hard to get anything to grow there. And stuff like this has happened around the world. In Haiti, for example, where they continue to burn up all of the wood to make charcoal for cooking and heating and these sorts of things, they haven't been planting back the trees, so they've basically caused sort of a desert to happen. If you look at satellite images from space of Haiti, Haiti is one half of Hispaniola. The other half is the Dominican Republic. You can see the border of the two countries. It's a perfectly straight line that goes north and south through Hispaniola. And on one side, it's very green. On the other side, it's completely brown because it's basically becoming a desert. And the longer this goes on, the more unlikely it will be to ever get plants to grow there because there won't be any topsoil and organic matter in the soil. So it's really important after a fire to get stuff growing again. So scientists are looking at these fungi for post-fire restoration of habitats. And this is a scientist that does this sort of work. Her name's Camille Stevens-Rumon. She works at Colorado State University, and we've had her as a lecturer at the Telluride Mushroom Festival that I've been the director of for over 10 years now. And she studies these fungi inoculating trees to give them a jump start. So after fire, some places you won't see any regrowth. You can see right here, these trees are putting on like 3 feet of growth per year and getting a jump start, holding onto the soil and getting things regenerated. Camille's husband, Seth Davis, he works on the bark beetles that kill the trees. So they both study sort of 2 sides of the same problem. The bark beetles, incidentally, are not an invasive species. They are native to the area. They've always killed the trees, but not so much. We think that this has become a really bad problem in the last few years, last decade or so, because of climate change. With milder winters, the beetle populations don't get knocked down and then seem to explode and overwhelm the trees. But you can for sure see this if you drive west across the country through the Rockies. You'll see big patches of trees killed by these beetles, and then the fires that have happened afterwards. So kind of sad. Okay, so if you're one of the beginner newbies in the room, this Lives of Fungi book that I did, each section on either reproduction or physiology or chemistry or whatever has a bunch of basics in the beginning, like a lot of other mushroom books do. It's it's not like a college textbook. It's pretty basic stuff. But then it has sort of wacky examples in the second half of each of the chapters. And one of the basics that you may have learned, if you learned anything at all about fungi when you're growing up in school, is that fungi rot things, right? And isn't this really nice that fungi rot things? Because without fungi, we would literally be buried under organic matter as trees die and this sort of stuff. And it seems kind of preposterous, actually, but it really is true. And we know this because if you dig down through layers of soil and go deeper and deeper down, of course, you're going back in time, right? All of these different layers, you can find different types of fossils. The further down you go, in general, you get to older fossils, and eventually you'll get down to before there were mammals and before there were reptiles and before there were fish and just shelled things. And eventually there'll be no fossils because you'll go so far back into time. But likewise, as you go down through layers of soil, you'll get to pockets of like natural gas, petroleum, coal, fossil fuels, right? Because stuff piled up and wasn't rotting because there wasn't anything to rot. And you'll get to a layer in the soil above which there's no more fossil fuels being made. And if you looked inside that layer, you would see, just like a lot of the other layers, all kinds of different fungal spores and pollen, because while they're not viable anymore, they fossilize really, really well because they're tough. And you could even tell, in many cases, what the pollen, what plants the pollen came from and what fungi made the spores. People that study places to dig for fossil fuels, palynologists, know about this. So you can get a hint as to what kind of fossil fuel you're getting there just by knowing the types of pollen. In any case, you'll see fungal spores in all of these different layers, but after a certain depth, you won't see wood rot fungi anymore because they hadn't evolved yet. So up until that time, plant matter really was not rotting. It wasn't breaking down because it turns out to rot woody materials is kind of a neat trick. There's some fungi that can do it and nothing else. I know you've seen beetles eating wood, wood wasps, termites, lots of organisms seemingly eating wood. They're eating it, but they're not digesting it. So wood cannot be digested. Cellulose cannot be digested by animals. Some fungi can digest cellulose. And so those animals that eat cellulosic matter, cattle, they have microbes in their gut that breaks down the cellulose. They're not doing it themselves. The wood wasps and wood-boring beetles, like the ones that are in the back, so those typically eat already partially digested and broken down wood, or they actually inoculate the wood. Some of them are so sophisticated that they carry wood rot fungi with them on special containers, inoculate the wood, wait for a period of time for the fungus to grow into the wood and partially digest it, believe it or not, and then they can consume it. So anyways, the upshot is, yes, a lot of fungi do rot stuff. Turns out what you learned in school, that fungi do this, isn't really true because most fungi do not do this. Most fungi are not saprobes. They're not saprotrophic, they are biotrophic. Most fungi are symbionts, which means they grow as mutualistic partners with other organisms, or they grow as pathogens of organisms or parasites. These are what symbionts are. Symbionts are organisms whose lives are intertwined. And I'm specifically saying this over and over because you see in literature a lot, newspapers and things like that, the word symbiont means mutualistically beneficial, and that's not true. It can be, but doesn't have to be. So COVID-19 virus and humans are symbionts. COVID-19, its life it's not living, it's a virus, but its biology is intimately tied with humans. So many are mutualists and some are parasites. So the other thing that's kind of enigmatic about fungi is they've long been studied by microbiologists and were the subject of microbiology class. They were considered microbes because they're tiny and small. Yeah, some are. Some are some of the largest organisms on Earth. And here's an example. I'm in this photo here at the bottom of the largest known Sitka spruce in the world. It's on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And this massive tree has a wood rot fungus in its heartwood, which is the agarikon fungus. Fomitopsis officinalis. And I know it's in there because I can see the mushroom fruit body of it sticking out the side of the tree. This is a perennial polypore that lasts on the tree for long periods of time, and every year puts down a new layer of pynidium that the spores come out of. So you can kind of figure out how old this particular mushroom is just by its size. So this particular mushroom's probably been on the tree several decades, maybe 30 or 40 years. The fungus inside the tree is probably centuries old and probably is enormous, maybe weighing hundreds of tons, a single organism. And in fact, this tree is really, really tall. It goes off the screen up into the ceiling of this building, and there's several more of these great big mushrooms perched sort of precariously over my head on up higher into the tree. So, there's a lot of enigmatic things about fungi that we thought we knew that, again, are kind of bizarre. But anyways, some more about these symbionts and enough about the saprobes. So these are going to be some mutualistic organisms. And you probably know about these. When I was a student, there wasn't a whole, it was a long time ago. There wasn't a whole lot known about mycorrhizal fungi. Now it's become a really hot area of research. Mycorrhizal fungi are fungi like many of the mushrooms that we pursue at forays every single year. Russulas, boletes, amanitas, lactarius, tricholomas, chanterelles, etc., etc. When you are out on a foray this year and you see any of those mycorrhizal fungi, many of which are popular edibles, and you pick it from the soil, or at least it seems that you're picking it from the soil. Unbeknownst to you, you are not picking it from the soil. It's coming from the roots of trees. So, what happens here is sort of illustrated by this little cartoon. So these amanitas here are attached by their hyphae to the roots of the trees. That's where they're getting their nutrition. They cannot be grown in a box of dirt or rotting material because that's not what they grow in. They grow from the roots of these trees, and they're a partner with the tree. They're basically farming the tree, or the reverse, the tree maybe is farming them. Anyways, it's an obligate association. The tree has to have the fungi, and the fungi have to have the tree in order to make a go of it. And they're often kind of in a species or genus specific situation. So you could try digging up the root tips of that tree to find where the fungi are attached. It's kind of hard to do. In a forest with large trees, it's tough to find root tips because some go down into the soil, some are up near the surface. Plus, you never know which tree root the tips belong to, right? It's easier to see stuff like this from seedlings where you can dig up the entire tree. So these are little bristlecone pine seedlings that I dug up in the Southwest and brought to my house in Illinois to plant in our places like an arboretum. I have all kinds of trees from all over the world growing there. And anyways, if you push aside the soil and get to the tips, it looks like they're kind of moldy and rotting and also kind of fat. They're not molding, rotting. That's the mycorrhizal fungus growing on the tips of the roots. And I don't know which fungus this is. It could be Amanita muscaria. And I say that because you very frequently see in the fall, in mushroom season, Amanita muscaria with bristlecone pine. It's a common host for it. And if you don't know about bristlecones, you should look into it. It's a very interesting tree. They're one of the highest elevation trees we have in North America, and they do a bunch of weird things. They're the oldest organisms we have. If you go to Great Basin National Park in Nevada, there's bristlecone pine trees that are over 6,000 years old, which are pretty astounding. And they're all gnarly and things. You've probably seen pictures of them. Or you can go to northern Arizona and northern New Mexico, and even in Colorado, and there's forests of fairly young ones. Obviously, these are seedlings here, so they don't all look old and gnarly. But it's a really cool, pretty tree, and I've long been fascinated with them. And it's one of these mycorrhizal types. So what's going on the tips of the roots? Well, to see what's going on, you could grow seeds in a pot up against a glass plate. If you've ever had a plant physiology book, a lot of botany books, lots of books about plants show these same photos. So someone got the bright idea to grow seeds of these conifers in a pot up against a piece of glass. And as the seedling sprouts up a little stem, at the same time, of course, it has a little root that sends down into the soil. The roots of this tree go out to right here. That's as far as the roots go, believe it or not. This one here, the roots kind of go about to right there, and that's it. All the rest of this stuff here, maybe you thought it was roots, it's not. That's fungus. That's the mycorrhizal partner of this tree. So what this points out is the mycorrhizal fungi that partner with the trees dramatically increase the surface area and absorptive surface for this tree. And they can also go really, really far out, much more distant to their host than the roots of the tree can on its own. If you've ever dug up a tree before, a fairly large tree, and gave it a shake and all the dirt falls off, there's not much on the root. It's just basically kind of a naked looking stem that looks like the branches of the above ground part of the tree. There's no root hairs or anything. All of the root hairs that do the business are fungus. They go out into the soil and bring in water and nutrients, etc. And that's what this cartoon shows. When the ectomycorrhizal fungi find their host, when the seed is germinating, they basically do sort of a parasitism. They grow into the roots like parasitic fungi do, grow into the tissues and even between the cells, a few cell layers deep, and then form this sheath on the outside of the root. The root gets kind of fat, the tip gets kind of fat, and that's where the fungus lives, and then goes further out into the soil to bring in nutrients. And that's what is going on here with this Amanita muscaria. It's showing that these nutrients and also water are brought into the tree and pumped into the tree. And then likewise, the tree is photosynthetic, and carbohydrates that the tree makes gets pumped into the fungus. That's where it gets its energy to do what it needs to do. And of course, there are fungi that rot things and don't have this association, but there's a lot of fungi that do this. Okay, so that's an ectomycorrhizal type fungus, and we know quite a bit about them because it's easy to spot them in the woods. They make these great big mushrooms, but they're really not the most important nor the most common type of mycorrhizae. The most common by far type of mycorrhizae we know almost nothing about because they don't make mushrooms. A few species that have been found of these so-called endomycorrhizal fungi or arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, a few kinds make sort of aggregations of spores that look like about the size of a pea, that looks like little bits of gravel maybe together. A lot of them don't even do that. Many of them don't seem to have sexual reproduction at all, and a lot of them don't even have the genes for sexual reproduction. So they're really kind of hard to figure out what's going on. Very few of them can be cultured. So although we know that they're in the soil all over the world, and especially in harsh places like deserts, mountaintops, beaches, places that are really Antarctica, places that are really tough for plants to grow, we know they're very important because you see the DNA of them in the soil, but we don't know what they look like. And something like only maybe 100 species or so have been named. So despite the fact that we know they're maybe the most important organisms on the planet because they partner with all kinds of plants, and plants are the input of energy to pretty much all life on the planet. Despite knowing they're the most important organisms, we know really nothing else about them and haven't seen most of them. What they do look like when you look for them is in the roots of plants. You'll see their hyphae don't grow between the cells; they actually grow right inside the cell of the plant and form these little absorptive kind of Christmas tree looking things called arbuscules, and that's why they're called arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. So this is an electron micrograph photo that's been falsely colored to show where the fungus is inside the cells of the root of this plant. So where this arbuscule is, the material actually goes into the plant and comes out of the plant and crosses this barrier there. Pretty interesting. So, I mentioned some of the groups of mycorrhizal fungi. So exactly which ones are we talking about? Again, pretty much all the mushrooms that you know of. There's a few that rot things, but a lot of them do this mycorrhizal association. So, of course, all kinds of truffles do this, and russulas, and lactarius, amanitas do this. So some of your favorites there. Cortinarius, really huge genus of mushrooms. Tricholomas like the matsutake here, Laccaria, which a lot of people don't know too much about. There's some of the little brown mushrooms, but this is one of the most important groups of mycorrhizal for a lot of different trees and forests, especially the further north you go on the planet. You see a lot of these little Laccarias that seem to be the main obligate symbiont of trees. Pretty much all the boletes, or nearly all the boletes, seem to be mycorrhizal. Chanterelles and even some morels seem to be mycorrhizal. So what this means is, obviously they're very important, but the other thing it means is, since you guys are the mushroom experts of your family and your street and your neighborhood, anyone finds a mushroom, of course they bring it to you, right? It's like, well, what is this? What's it doing? I'm sure you get asked this all the time. I was at the store and I saw dried porcini mushrooms, or I saw chanterelles on the market. Why are they so crazy cheap? Why can't they just throw them in a box of manure like those dumb button mushrooms? Well, because that's not how they grow. They don't rot stuff. They're not a saprobe. They are a biotrope. And it's possible to grow the tree host on your property and maybe they'll fruit, but you can't just simply grow them in rotting material because that's not what they grow on. So, and how common are they? They're extremely common. Half of all the basidiomycete fungi seem to be mycorrhizal, and many of the ascomycetes are mycorrhizal as well. And if you know anything about fungi, the ascomycetes are things like morels and cup fungi and yeast and a lot of plant pathogens, etc. Ascomycetes are by far and away the most diverse group of fungi on the planet. You don't have a whole lot of them show up at a foray because most of those are basidiomycetes, but the vast majority of fungi are ascomycetes, and a lot of those are mycorrhizal as well. A lot of those form lichens too. And as best as we can tell, about 90% of all plant groups do this, have this obligate association, and probably 100% of all trees known seem to have obligate association with fungi. In fact, about the only group that doesn't seem to do this mycorrhizal partnership is the Brassicaceae, so cabbages and things like that, and mustards. And it's just recently been found, seem to have other microbes that they partner with that seems to take up the same role that mycorrhizal fungi do. So, when mycologists say fungi are like the puppet masters of the whole world, it really is true. The plants really rely on them. In fact, plants move from the ocean to terrestrial areas probably only because fungi were there first and helped them to get onto the soil. So if you're a mushroom lover, this is something to cheer about. Okay, so those are not saprobic, but biotrophic associations. Here's some other biotrophic associations that are a little stranger, and we thought we knew what was going on, but just recently we found out some other things. So this is the ash bolete. I don't know if you've ever seen this before. Up until recently, this was white ash trees were just about the most common tree in the Midwest. And likewise, the ash bolete was probably about the most common mushroom in the Midwest. Much more recently, we've had an invasive beetle, the emerald ash borer, come through, and it's really extirpated white ash trees from much of the Midwest. So they're pretty much on the outs, and this poor bolete will go the way of them as well. And I'm calling it a bolete because, unbeknownst to everyone, it's a bolete. It grows with ash trees. When you see it from above, it's kind of round and puffy. When you flip it over, it seems to have pores underneath, and in all older guidebooks, of course, it's called the ash bolete. Turns out, Gyrodon marulioides, it's called marulioides because it doesn't really have true pores. It has sort of a marulioid or marulus-like veiny hymenium that kind of looks like a bolete. But it turns out this bolete isn't really a true bolete at all. It comes from agaric forms, and the gill-like hymenium that it used to have, it's evolved over time to look more and more like a bolete. Oh well. But we thought it was a bolete, and another reason we thought it was a bolete, besides it seems to have these pores, was because it grew with trees. And as you know, all boletes are mycorrhizal and grow with trees, except, FYI, the last couple of years we found that's not true either. So you can demonstrate to that this for sure is not coming from the ash tree that it's growing under just by digging around under this. And so that's what this really large picture shows here. The Telluride Mushroom Festival that I've been a part of for many, many years happens in August. And the weekend before or after, most years, the Colorado Mycological Society, or wait, are they called the Society of, maybe I got their name wrong too. No, the Colorado Mycological Society in Denver, they have a big mushroom fair at the Denver Botanic Gardens. It's really cool, and the garden is really cool if you've never been. It has a huge collection of native plants from Colorado, so a lot of neat desert things. I really love going there. And their mushroom fair is always really good too. Anyways, this particular year, I pulled up along the street to park in a neighborhood, and the other mycologist that was in the car with me and a couple students, we all hopped out and were marching up the sidewalk. And I'm like, oh, wow, check this out. Here's a few white ash trees. They're a popular street tree in Colorado and also out west too, in California in some places, but they're native to the Midwest where I'm from. Anyways, I'm like, oh, this is really cool. These are American white ash, Fraxinus americana, and I bet you this time of the year they'll have these big ash boletes beneath them. And sure enough, they did. And so I dug up some, like, do you know what these things occur with? And they're like, well, duh, they're ash boletes. They occur with ash. I'm like, actually, they don't. I'll show you what their obligate partner is. And so I dug some of these up. This photo was taken on this lady's lawn about 1 minute before she came rushing out of her house, screaming at us to get off of her lawn and to stop digging up the lawn and looking at these things. If you've who has had this happen to them? You've been on someone's lawn picking mushrooms and got chased off. If you haven't had this happen to you, you haven't been a mushroomer long enough. Because for sure, if you've done it for a long time, it's happened numerous times. Right before we got chased off, I'm digging around and I found what I was looking for, these little dark pea-like things, if you can see them at the red arrows. That's the obligate host for the ash bully. What this is a little bug that is a parasite of ash trees. This was just discovered not that long ago, like less than 20 years ago, believe it or not. And so this little aphid, the ash aphid, I forget what the genus and species is, it flies around as an adult, it sniffs out white ash trees, climbs down the side of the tree, goes underground, lays eggs on the roots, and the eggs hatch, and the little babies latch on to the tree. While this is going on, I mean, these are nice, juicy little tiny grubs. There's lots of things in the soil would want to eat them. And likewise, the tree has seen these things coming down the pike before. It wants to pitch them out by its immune system. Well, the bug has an advantage in that as it's getting going, the fungus that's in the soil sniffs out the bug because that's its obligate host, and its hyphae grows around the bug that's latched onto the tree and forms this gall and prevents nematodes, parasitic, and predaceous bugs in the soil from eating the thing because it makes this gall around it. And then, believe it or not, each one of these has a very thin hyphae, much thinner than a human hair, that then goes through the soil at the time of fruiting up to the surface and makes one of these mushrooms. Isn't that hard to believe? That's pretty incredible. So again, this is another mushroom that this was maybe the first mushroom I learned in the Midwest. It's so common. Turns out what we thought we knew about it, we didn't have a clue as to what was going on in its life cycle. So here's something that maybe you saw in the back of the room. This is a cordyceps fungus on an ant. This photo came from Trad Cotter, who you probably know, who's in the area. And also I have to point out the photo's upside down. The ants that get zombified by this cordyceps typically are latched onto the plant, onto the twig or branch upside down. And I asked Sam about his, and he said his were in fact found upside down, right? So I'm not making this up. Anyways, back there under the scope, you'll see something that looks exactly like this. So what's going on here? So this is a type of a fungus in a group, a really, really large group. When I was a student, there was like 2 cordyceps species in the world. Now there's hundreds and hundreds of species. There's, I don't know, like a dozen or maybe 2 dozen families now. They've been heavily studied recently, and they're really fascinating. And these are known as the zombifying fungi. So these fungi get inside of their animal host, in this case, an ant, and the fungus grows for quite a period of time that doesn't really harm its animal host until it's time to reproduce. And then it produces animal hormones and takes over the mind of the ant and tells it where to grow on the tree because now and latch on because now it's going to go into reproductive mode, make spores, and reinfect its next batches of hosts and complete the life cycle. So what happens next after the ant latches on? It produces this long stalk, and this thing up here, sort of like the mushroom of the fungus. This is the stroma. If you were to cut that stroma in half, so back there under the scope, you can see how tiny these are, but through the magic of microscopy, I can show you what's going on. At the right arrow, the red arrow, that's the stalk of this thing coming out of the ant at the neck, and then there's that stroma at the top, and you can see there's bumps on it that look like little pimples. Each one of those bumps is where these spores are made. It's made in a chamber called a perithecium, and this is one of those stroma sliced in half. And you can see these chambers here. And in fact, you can see where the neck or the ostiole of this chamber is, where it comes to the surface, it forms a little bump there. And so there's an opening there. Inside each one of these perithecia are all of the asci, and each ascus makes the ascospores, and they're blasted out through that hole and then rain down on the unwitting hosts below, and it starts the whole life cycle all over again. So there's a lot of fungi in this order of ascomycetes, hundreds and hundreds of species that do all kinds of other things. But in nature, to see some other things very similar to this, a really good example are dead man's fingers. Xylari polymorpha, all around the eastern part of North America, very common fungus. So they're these large very dark finger-like things that stick up from rotting wood, right? Everybody's seen them, or most everybody's seen them. Okay, if you collect one of these things, it's very, very dark. If you snap it in half, it's very white on the inside, and that's the reason why I'm specifically pointing out this fungus. It makes it easy to see the parathecia. But if you snapped one of those in half, around the perimeter of one of those stroma, you would see all of these little
Hello.
chambers, because it's also a
How are you?
parathecial fungus. And these chambers are very dark black, and it makes black spores, and the stromal tissue itself is white. So they show up very, very easily, and it's easy to see with the naked eye. They're very cool to see. So when you're out foraging this year, be on the lookout for that. Another thing to see about this fungus is when that stroma first sticks up, it's a kind of white and powdery, and that's because before it goes into sexual reproductive mode and makes ascospores, it makes conidia, it makes asexual spores. So it does both types of reproduction on the same stalk. Not many fungi do that, but it's kind of cool for that reason as well. Okay, and I mentioned the asexual form. So here's an asexual form of cordyceps, and there's no way anyone's ever heard of this before. So, but there is a way that you may have heard of the person who owns this hand. So up in the northern part of Wisconsin, there's a foray that I started quite a few years ago with the Wisconsin Mycological Society called the Northwoods Foray, and it's my personal favorite foray. And in fact, we even had the NAMA foray there one year in 2017. So that hand belongs to Emily Stone. In Santa Cornell, you know Emily Stone for sure. So she's a naturalist up there, and she's always finding stuff. And she knows a lot of stuff about the forest, but not everything. But because she's a naturalist and really smart, she's a really good observer. So a couple winters ago, she's out cross country skiing and took pictures of this and said, "What the heck do you think these little knobs are? It's got to be a fungus, right?" And I'm like, "Wow, that's pretty weird." And she even sent another photo. She's like, "A close up, all I had was my phone, but a close up shows those little bumps are attached to these scales. And I want to tell you about the scales." And she's like, "I've been skiing past and hiking past these red oaks along this path for years. Last year, I noticed they were covered with scale insects. And this is a type of an insect that latches onto the tree, forms a shell over the top, and just sucks the juices out of the tree. And a lot of them carry disease or can kill trees. There's scales of any kind of tree you can think of. There's all kinds of species of scale insects, and they're hemipterans. Anyways, so she saw an outbreak of these scales and was paying attention to it because she thought it might kill the red oak trees. Anyways, then this next fall, late fall, now she noticed these stalks sticking out of them. What are they? You think they're a fungus? I'm like, yeah, I know exactly what that is. This fungus has been seen in nature maybe 5 or 6 times. It's super, super unknown in nature. And she's like, well, how could you possibly know what it is? I'm like, oh, well, it's because it's very well known amongst plant pathologists who have found this and now grow it in labs and then have made chemical sprays they can spray on outbreaks of pests like this. This is the anamorphic or asexual form of the cordyceps, and it kills a lot of insects. So Hirsitella is what it's called, and you can Google this. Hirsitella is not really well known from nature because, again, it makes little tiny structures that nobody ever sees, but it can be cultivated quite easily. And then when you spray it onto its particular host, it'll kill them quite readily. Anyways, look at these stalks. Looks just like the cordyceps on the ant, right? There's a stroma at the tip of the stalk. It has all these little pimply bumps, and inside are not going to be parathecia, but they're going to be asexual spores or conidia. So pretty cool. So be a good observer. Here's some other things maybe you have observed in nature, and these are biotrophs that, again, I was going to say we weren't really sure what they're doing, but actually we still don't even know. Have you ever seen this before? This is Boletus parasiticus. This is a little bolete. You can see it's a bolete. There's the pores underneath there. Whenever you find Boletus parasiticus, it's always attached seemingly to sclerodermas, these earth balls or pigskin puffballs. Sclerodermas are mycorrhizal. They are partners with lots of different types of trees, and you've seen these before, right? They look like puffballs when you cut them in half. They're quite hard and solid, and they get kind of purple-black on the inside. You're not supposed to eat them because they're poison. But sometimes in the east, you'll see this mushroom associated with it. You have this in Georgia, right? Has anyone seen it? Okay. So I don't see it in North America too often. I see it all the time in Italy. I'm not sure why it's more common there. But in any case, so if you have an old guidebook, it'll say this bolete. Boletes are supposed to be mycorrhizal, so it must it must be attached to the tree, and maybe the scleroderma is a parasite. Well, it seems like now maybe this fungus isn't actually mycorrhizal. Maybe it's a parasite on the scleroderma, or maybe both seem to be partners benefiting one another. The jury's still out. We still don't know. So if you want to do a research project, this would be something to look into, because we still don't know really what's going on here. Here's some other things that we still don't know what's going on. Have you ever seen Amanita muscaria in the forest? And very often you'll see this little bolete fruiting with them. This is Chalcoporus. They never get very big. It's a little bitty guy, only a couple inches tall, has little red pores underneath. It's peppery hot if you take a bite of it, which is why it's called Chalcoporus piperatus. Anyways, it was long thought to fruit at the same time as Amanita muscaria from the same tree host. That's why we've always seen this. North America, Europe, wherever. In fact, this photo I think was taken also in Italy. Anyways, it turns out, it seems that maybe Chalcoporus is actually a parasite on the Amanita. So again, this is another bolete. Boletes are supposed to be mycorrhizal, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's a parasite on this Amanita. Or who knows, maybe it's some sort of a mutualistic partner. We still really don't know. It's super common. You see it all the time. I see it many, many times every single year. Still don't really know what's going on there. So be on the lookout for that. Here's something else maybe you've seen. Who knows what this mushroom is? Yes, it's definitely not hideous, but it is a gomphidius. So I really love gomphidius. I think they're definitely not hideous as a lot of people call them. I think they're some of the prettiest mushrooms. They can be big and showy and somewhat colorful. They can be very slimy, and they have a partial veil that's this slime. Isn't that very cool? And look at those freaky gills that kind of go down the stalk, and they have very dark spores. You can see the spore color there on the stalk. Another thing about these guys, they're an agaric, obviously. An agaric is a mushroom with a cap and a stalk and gills, except that they're not. They're actually a type of a bolete, believe it or not. So they come from bolete lineage that used to have pores, and now their pores have gotten bigger and bigger to the point where now they look just like gills. And there's a lot of mushrooms that have gills that has led us to think that it seems that gills have evolved numerous times on mushrooms. But anyways, if you find a gomphidius species in the forest, and by the way, a lot of people think that they're poisonous. They're actually edible and pretty tasty. If you find gomphidius in the forest, have you ever seen any other mushrooms nearby? You should see Suillus nearby. Suillus and gomphidius always fruit together. And so, again, all the guidebooks have said the same thing. Well, these two organisms seem to have the same host and fruit at the same time. But now it seems that gomphidius might be a parasite on the Suillus. But who knows? Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe some species of Suillus no longer are ectomycorrhizal, and this type of a bolete maybe now is a parasite on the gomphidius. We still just don't know. People are actually studying it. So here's a few more pictures of cordyceps. Cordyceps are pretty cool. I mentioned that a lot of them, of course, attack different animals, arthropods, cicadas, grasshoppers, spiders, ants, all kinds of arthropods. But some have sort of broke away from their animal hosts and now parasitize other fungi. And so this is one that you might see in the southeast. This is a cordyceps that attacks the deer truffle, which is the genus Elaphomyces, shown here. So have you seen this before, Elaphomyces? Yeah, it's somewhat common in the southeast. Frankly, about the only time you ever find it is if something dug it up, or if you find a cordyceps attached to it, you pluck it that way. So this guy, same thing. It parasitizes this fruit body and then makes a stalk, and then up here's where the spores are made in the perithecia. So oh yeah, you know what? So I took this photo years ago. I've used this as a slide for many, many years. Last spring or fall was the very first time, Cornelia, that someone said, "Is there another mushroom in that photo?" I'm like, "No." They're like, "Yeah, look in the upper corner." I said, "Oh, that's right." And of course, and that's how I know that this was taken in the south, is because that's a calostoma. Uh, well, that's a leaf up there. You mean this here? No idea what's going on there. What's happening? Something happening there? I don't know what's. Oh, it wouldn't surprise me. Oh, you mean like Rhytisma or something like that? Oh, well, looks like American Beach. Oh no, this looks like that's not beach. This is birch or maybe hornbeam. I suspect that's hornbeam. Yeah, and that's looks like maple. So yeah, I don't know what's going on here. Yeah, that's probably some sort of a fungus or a microbe or something. And Rhytisma can make like a tar spot looking spot on maple leaves. There's tremendous numbers of fungi that grow in all kinds of leaves, and I'm definitely not the person to ask either. But back to this guy. So do you know what the common name of this is? This calostoma? Hot lips, one of the great names in all of science. So it has this little opening. It's like a puffball on a stalk, and it has this little opening here. Uh, and so that species is this is the pale calostoma. So this is one of those hot lips. So good observation. I was in my photo for years. I never noticed it until one other person brought it to my attention. Here's another one of these Elaphocordyceps on a deer truffle. Photo was shot in Italy as well. When you see these things, they're really hard to notice. They're so small. They're about the size of maybe a wooden match sticking up out of the soil. So basically, it takes either some sort of freak of nature in your club that likes finding stuff like this, or little kids find them, or if it's one of those super dry years and you know how you're like crawling on hands and knees around a stump or a log where there's some moisture, that's when you find stuff like this. This happened to be found by a person on the tour I was leading, and she's like a freak of nature. She finds the coolest mushrooms. But anyway, she's like, "Is this a fungus?" I'm like, "Yeah." And if we dig away really carefully, we'll find the brightly colored rhizomorphs that go down into the soil and are connected to its truffle host. So pretty cool. And then, yeah, one more cordyceps. This is the one that probably everyone knows about. This is the cordyceps that occurs in the Himalayas of Nepal and Tibet. And by the way, on the tour that we did in both Annapurna and to Everest, we did encounter a few. It was sort of outside the season, but we did encounter a few cordyceps, so that was also kind of cool. Anyways, everyone knows about this story probably because this is one of the most amazing stories in nature, and this cordyceps here is one of the most important and expensive foods on the planet. So this is collected in the Himalayas and has been used in traditional Chinese medicine for centuries, if not millennia. It's worth by weight far more than gold. And it's makes up, if you're familiar with where Tibet is, Tibet's an autonomous region of China. If it was still an independent country, it'd be one of the biggest countries in the world. It's a really, really huge area. And this fungus makes up something like 85% of the entire gross domestic product of Tibet. So the whole economy is based on this. So I know what you're going to ask. When it's the season for this thing, so probably every single person, man, woman, and child, go out into the plains to collect this? Yes. Every business stops, schools let out, everything. Nobody does anything but goes into the mountains to collect this because it's worth so much money. And so, millions of dollars worth of this stuff are collected and then sold to buyers going to Hong Kong and China and other parts of the world to use in traditional medicine. And these piles of millions of dollars worth are being brought in by people that make like $600 a year, maybe. So this is a major deal for people to find this sort of stuff. So you would think something that was worth so much money and so important to medicine for centuries or millennia, you think everything was known about this thing. And you'd also think that everyone trying to find every last one of these because it's worth so much money, that this would probably go extinct, right? You're going to ask me. There's no way this is going to go extinct. Even though the collecting of this, the numbers have been starting to go down because of over collecting. I don't think it's going to go extinct. And here's why. Despite the fact this most common fungus, worth more than anything in the world, everyone knows about it. Everyone in here's heard of this, right? And seen it. It's in National Geographic TV shows. Everyone's always talking about this. Despite knowing everything about this, it turns out just a couple years ago, a very important thing about its life cycle was just discovered that shows that this fungus probably doesn't care about the caterpillar at all. The caterpillar for sure doesn't care about the fungus because it gets killed by the fungus. This caterpillar without the fungus parasite would turn into a ghost moth, which eats grasses and things out there on the prairie. This is a very dry area, kind of like the Great Plains. It's too dry for trees, so there's all kinds of other grasses and things that grow in these huge, huge areas. And the ghost moth eats them. So what's going on here during the normal life cycle of this thing? The fungus spores get inside the caterpillar, and kind of similar to other cordyceps. It doesn't kill the caterpillar right away, goes through the tissues, but it wants to make sure the caterpillar goes through its entire life cycle to get full size. And then the next season is when this produces the stalk in the spring and makes the spores. So the caterpillar molts and gets larger, it molts again, goes through its whole life cycle as a juvenile moth. At the end of the season, winter's coming on, it digs down into the soil. Lots of organisms do that here in North America too, probably most insects. Digs down to the soil, pupates, and then the next season it would come out as an adult moth that, the only purpose is really for reproduction and is short-lived. Well, in this case, that's not going to happen. There's not going to be a pupation or anything because, of course, the fungus killed the caterpillar. But what happens next, right before this guy starts digging in for the winter, that's when the fungus takes over and zombifies the caterpillar, and now it's calling all of the shots. Rather than dig down as deep as it possibly can to get below the frost line, which would kill it, the caterpillar now, under the control of the fungus, can only dig down so deep because if it digs down too deep, the stalk that the fungus makes won't emerge above the soil. So it actually doesn't dig very deep at all. The other thing that happens, instead of the caterpillar normally going head first and digging downwards, as you might expect, the caterpillar actually orients head up, which is also advantageous to the fungus because it comes out of its neck, just like those cordyceps on the end. And so that's what makes the stalk, makes the spores. What comes next, we don't really know. How do the spores get into the caterpillar the next year? It's been hypothesized the caterpillar breathes in the spores, or the caterpillar is munching on foliage that has spores on it and gets into the caterpillar like that. It turns out neither one of those is probably true, because where the fungus hangs out the rest of the year, maybe always, just was discovered. It's inside some of the plants. It's an endophyte in the plants. The caterpillar eating those plants, that's probably how it gets infected. But the thing is, if the caterpillar doesn't eat the plant and it never reproduces sexually because it has to go through the caterpillar to reproduce sexually, it probably really doesn't matter. The fungus moves around with the plants. The fungus probably also makes asexual spores too. We just don't know. And in fact, that's the thing that goes on, at least it's my belief. A lot of the mushrooms we collect, that you're picking them, probably doesn't matter. Most, if not all, of the spores coming from all of those mushrooms you pick probably aren't going to amount to anything. Probably nothing at all. Because the fungus can move around through the soil and reproduce asexually, and probably, we don't really know yet with most groups, probably can make asexual spores too. So this is what's really also amazing about fungi is they have a number of different ways of reproducing. But with this particular fungus, what is astounding is obviously it can do fungus things, all the things that a fungus needs to do to reproduce, make fungus, physiology and chemistry and all that sort of stuff. It can also do all these animal things too. It gets inside of an animal, it evades its immune system, and even makes animal hormones to direct the animal what to do and when to do it better than the animal. And it turns out it also lives inside of a plant and apparently does plant things too. It evades the plant's immune system. It's probably a mutualist partner with the plant and benefits the plant somehow. It's pretty astounding that the fungus is smarter than the animals and plants that it lives inside, along with doing its fungal things too. So this is why fungi are the smartest organisms. We'll never be able to defeat them. And in fact, that's the end of the show. So thanks for your attention. Do we got questions and do we have time? Okay. Yes and yes. Great. And what about, yeah. Yeah, what I do? Oh, so you didn't see Last of Us? You mean you don't know? Yeah. You got that right. So the question was, are there cordyceps that attack animals and no, mammals? And no, not really, but several other fungi do. And as it turns out, not a whole lot proportionally of our pathogens are fungal. Most of our problematic pathogens are bacterial, which is fortuitous because we can easily defeat most bacteria just by feeding them poisons that kill bacteria cells but don't harm our cells. Fungi and animals are so closely related evolutionarily that to kill fungal cells is a neat trick without killing our own cells. We have very similar systems. So until very recently, if you had simple skin infections, toenail infections, there weren't really many medications, and that's why. Bacteria, antibiotics that kill bacteria, you can eat shovels full of that sort of stuff because they target systems in bacteria that we don't have, so they don't harm us at all. What's really interesting, though, back to what Cornelius' comment is, and actually even partly Sam's question too. So, if you're familiar with a book that just came out by a scientist, his name is Casadevall, Arturo Casadevall. He's been writing about how a number of recent outbreaks of pathogenic fungi, including this new yeast called Candida aurum. It's like a super yeast that can't be easily defeated. And he studied where it came from and how it got started, but also looking at other fungi as well. What he's saying is the reason that a lot of microbes like bacteria can attack us is they're more easily, they can live at higher body temperatures. Fungi are more sensitive to higher temperatures, and therefore the few fungi that do attack us, mostly it's at the extremities, like our fingernails, toenails, hair, ears, etc. Not too many things can get inside of us because fungi are more sensitive to temperatures starting to get above 100 degrees. If you've grown mushrooms at home, you know this. So they're not so easily grown at higher temperatures. However, with climate change, everywhere the environments are getting warmer, which is selecting for fungi that are more tolerant. And what we're seeing is some of the fungi that never used to bother us now are starting to cause disease. So Casadevall just wrote a book that's called "What If Fungi Win?" Have you seen this book? It just came out. It's pretty fascinating, and it kind of summarizes a lot of different studies he's had over the years. So, a subliminal, shameless ad for Fungi Magazine. The very next issue will have a big review of it and a review of all of his work because I've been fascinated with this stuff for a long time. So, no, cordyceps don't attack us yet, but yes, just as Cornelia said, I think we will be seeing more and more of these for this very reason. Oris, yes, Candida oris, exactly. And there's a couple other cladosporiums and some other things too, but that's the one that's been getting the news. Yes, Sandra. Yeah. Oh, right. Yep. 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 I know where you're going with this. Yep. Exactly. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yep. I know where you're going with this because this is the exact question that people know about stuff like this ask. This is a really good question. Okay, so back to the burn morels. Uh, does the tree have to die, et cetera, et cetera? Okay, so I left out one key little thing. If you want to go to a burn to pick morels, I left out one key little thing that the commercial pickers know that if you've never been, you might not know. So don't go wandering out into the burn like the middle where it was super hot. The morels are actually picked kind of on the perimeter where the fire was dying out or got put out by smoke jumpers or something. And so that's where you'll see the fire was not nearly so hot. A lot of the plants didn't get totally cooked. And in fact, maybe the leaves didn't even get burned off. They have kind of a red color to them. They're killed, but they're still in the tree and they have this reddish color about them. That's like a sign that the burn morels will be much more prolific there. So I think what has to happen is the roots have to still be alive. Maybe not the top part of the tree, but the roots didn't get totally cooked and sterilized for the morels to come out. Yeah. Yep. Yep. And that's where, in the studies that I was showing of Brandon Matheny, some of his plots were these controlled burn areas that are a lot cooler burns. And so, in fact, he was finding the burn morel DNA in a number of different plants that really weren't burned up at all. So, if you saw in the picture, it showed mosses and bryophytes and lichens and things. These were kind of tucked away in nooks and crevices around roots and holes in the soil, nooks and crevices of rocks and things like that. So I think it's important it doesn't get hot enough to totally burn up and sterilize things. Some plant material has to still be alive there because the fungus is in the plant material. Yeah. Technology is cool. So Hen in the back was up earlier. Yes. Okay. Yep. So, right. So there's different kinds of berm rails also. I guess there was a couple things I didn't point out. So some morels that come up after a burn or a disturbance, they're not one of these endomycorrhizal types. So the Morchella septentrionalis, if you see it has like ribs that looks like a ladder, that's a landscape disturbance morel that can be cultivated. Yeah, so you don't have to have trees with it. It doesn't have to have a fire or whatever. The Morchella rufobrunnea is another one. It grows after a disturbance, but it also grows in mulch and gets moved around, etc. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, you know what? So someone was telling me, I think it was in this club. So some morels, if you go down to low areas that kind of are prone to flooding once in a while, they're kind of sandy and silty. Some of the morels that grow in these areas, don't just grab it or cut it. Try to dig down. So some of these have sclerotia at the bottom, and the sclerotia can be every bit as big as the mushroom itself. Has anyone ever seen these in sandy areas before? So yeah, you mentioned the sclerotia that you were basically just using those to propagate. And so that's one of them, and a number of different mushrooms from a sclerotium, those lacocephalums make a big sclerotium underground. What the sclerotium is as the fungus lives throughout the year and does its business, either saprobic or mycorrhizal, they seem to store nutrients for the whole growing season in one of these kind of reserves. And then when it's time to fruit, it draws from those reserves and makes the mushrooms. So in this case, he's sort of like planting the sclerotia and then fruit bodies will come up. So yeah, I mean, so it's definitely not as simple as I made it seem at the outset. There's other things, but yes, sir. Well, so the damage to the question is there something about the fire that signals to the mushroom? I think the thing is that it stresses its host out, and now the fungus, which was probably perfectly fine living for years and years and years, and reproducing or not reproducing, totally fine. Now the plant's so stressed out, maybe even killed, that now the fungus goes into reproductive mode. It's the same with Sam was talking about the dead elms and morels in the Midwest where I live. So you can be driving around, see big mature elms starting to get sick from Dutch elm disease. Go back to that tree next year. It's probably going to be dead, and there'll be morels on it. There were no morels there the previous year, the previous year, the previous year. When the tree dies, all of a sudden morels. The fungus is growing with its host and seemingly perfectly fine. When its tree host dies, it's basically like, I'm out of here, goes into sexual reproductive mode, and then makes the fruit bodies, which make the spores, and then, it starts all over again. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep. I've absolutely seen great big American elm trees in the Midwest where one side died off and the other side was still alive, but the dead side had more elves. I've absolutely seen that. And yeah, the trees of color, that's his nickname. It's a real thing. I mean, no, I don't know anybody else that uses that term, but I know what he's talking about. So when the tree first, the year before it dies, Dutch elm disease, this fungus kind of gums up the vascular tissue of the tree. And there's a lot of diseases that do this. So the year before it dies, it, it can't send nutrition all the way up to the branches and all the way down the roots. So it starts popping out little sucker sprouts along the side. There's pathogens of a lot of trees that do this. So I start watching those trees. Then when it's really starting to die, now the bark starts peeling off and it reveals different colors on the side of the tree that's under the bark and on top of the bark. And that's when you see that happening, that tree next year, sadly, it's going to be dead, but it's going to be pushing up morels for sure. And then the second year after the death, you can still see quite a few morels maybe under the tree. Third and fourth year, maybe one or two, but after 3 or 4 years, there's no more morels under that tree, and you have to find new spots, which makes it challenging. Yes. Yeah. So the question, how long after the burn do burn morels appear? So it's usually the first full year after the burn. It, but given that the conditions are right, that next spring, right, it has to be nice and moist and the right soil temperatures and all this sort of business. So there's more to it than just that. The other thing is if the fire, and it's like the dying elm phenomenon, it's very similar to that. If that elm tree died really late in the year, like fall, when it finally kicked the bucket, the very next spring, it doesn't seem like it's enough time for the morels to happen. So you often have to wait a second year. And likewise, if the fire was very late in the year, fall, or even in the wintertime, the next spring, which is only a few weeks later, oftentimes that's not enough time for the burn morels to happen. Um, but at the same time, if you come back again the second year after the burn, there still might not be any morels because it just wasn't the right conditions ever for it to happen. So it's not necessarily automatic, but if there's pretty much a full year between the burn and then the very next morel season, that's usually about the right amount of time. Oh yes, ma'am. Yes. So the question is, are burn rails only burn rails and nothing else? Yes, I think so. So burn rails, so it's kind of tricky. So burn morels are always known to be black morels. So morels are of four different groups, if you don't know. So there's the yellow morels and the Escalenta clade or Americana clade. There's the black morels, which are like the Angiceps clade. There's the Rufobrunnea clade, and then there's one other kind of an oddball clade. And so, how would you know which morels you have? Is it by color? No. So yellow morels in quotes can be very dark color. Black morels can be yellow in color. How you can tell the difference is fairly simple, but it doesn't really have anything to do with color, believe it or not. If you slice morels in half, you know the how to tell morels. If it ain't hollow, do not swallow. Right? That's the adage. And like with gyrometras, they're not hollow all the way through, and they're also kind of reddish. So if it ain't hollow, do not swallow. And if it is reddish, you could be deadish. So don't eat gyrometers unless you know what you're doing. Anyways, if you slice the morel in half all the way through, where the cap comes down and attaches to the stalk, it will attach with no overhang in the yellow morel group. If the cap comes down and it attaches, but there is kind of an overhang and a dip that's called vallecula. It's a French word. It means, I think it means valley or something. So there'll be a vallecula. There's a little bit of an overhang. The black morels have that. The Rufobrunnea group, the half-free morels, that overhang is quite pronounced so that the cap kind of hangs down. And I think you have half-free morels down here, or no? Okay, yeah. In the Midwest, they're super common. In fact, a lot of people don't even collect them because they're kind of small and people only keep the top part or whatever. I collect them all. So that's the Rufobrunnea. I mean, that's the Semi-Libra and the black group and the yellow group. When they start out, they're usually quite gray color. So a long time ago when I was a kid, there were gray morels. That was the early morels. And then they got bigger. And then there was the big foot morels, the Morchella crassipes that had the great big stalk. Yeah, that was idiotic. So morels just keep getting bigger and bigger and the stalk gets bigger. So that has nothing to do with it. So the black morels used to be the group we thought contained all of the burn morel species, but it turns out there's yellow morels too that are burn morels. Yeah. And if you go way up into Alaska, there's a type of a burn morel that's even different still. It's kind of green and furry. They're kind of cool. Larry Evans calls them pickles. And that's the ones a lot of commercial pickers pick. It's a type of a black morel. Oh, so okay, so it seems that if a morel seems to be associated with fire, that's what they always do. If they're associated with apple trees, that's what they always do. They don't do the burn thing. If they're a landscape mulch morel like Rufobrunnea, that's what they always do. They move around with mulch. So yeah, they don't seem to switch lifestyle. If it's kind of hard to believe that some of the species within that genus can be saprotrophic and some be biotrophic, that's actually quite common. Gyrometras, there are saprotrophic species and there are mycorrhizal species of gyrometras. And those are, they're basically in the same family, frankly, depending on the taxonomist. And Helvella's, it's believed to be the same thing. It can be saprotrophs and mycorrhizal types. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah. So if you see a burn rail, it's not going to be doing anything else. It seems that that's what it always does. Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, yeah. Yeah. Short answer, yes. So yeah, so the question is, how would you determine if something's parasitic? So I consider mycorrhizal association that's a parasite. It's just that most of the time the parasitism turns out to be beneficial to both partners, but it doesn't have to be. In studies, you can stress out one of the partners, and it will kick out the other partner. Uh, oh, and the chalciporas. So, so the definition of a parasite is an organism that benefits itself to the detriment of its host. So again, that doesn't always have to be the case. Sometimes they could be mutualistic, but and sometimes not. So, how would they determine that? Good question. I think that's why nobody's determined it. Yeah, I think you would have to find. You would have to find. Yeah, I think you could find out if one was getting goodies from the other. You might not necessarily know if one was um, to the detriment of the other without growing them. It's Amanitas are all but impossible to grow because they're mycorrhizal. Yeah, yeah, stuff like this is really hard to do. A lot of ecological studies are really difficult, if not impossible, to do. But yeah, you could potentially find where the goodies were starting out and moving around by radioactive tracers or something like that. That's been done. So yeah, that's a very good question, actually. Was there any more Zoom question? Oh, you have another question? Yeah. So I showed pictures of the Elaphiocordyceps that attack fungi. Yeah. Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. So the question is, are there other fungi that are parasitic to other fungi? Yes, tons of them, lots and lots of them. You need to read my Lives of Fungi book. There's a whole chapter on hot fungus on fungus action. It's definitely very much R rated. Yeah. Uh, Stuff like that's harder to know. So the question is, do we know of any situations where something jumped from one host to another? Stuff like that's harder to know just because it happened. It's happening. It hasn't that it's happened. It's happening over long, long periods of time, and evolutionary studies are kind of tough to know. And and it's tough to know for a lot of reasons. It's taken lots of time, very gradual changes, but also fossil record is absolutely totally incomplete with all organisms. We really can't make statements about the evolution of humans, whales, trees, anything really without knowing all of the species that are now extinct. And in some cases we know some from fossils, but it's totally incomplete. So it's really hard to know exactly who begat whom and know all that. So it's pretty fascinating to look into and study. Okay. He actually is going to be starting some books over there. I want to remind people about next month. We've got Alan Burgo, and if you haven't checked out his website, which is called Forager Chef, you will want to check it out. It will make you hungry, just as a warning. And he's going to be talking as the Alston lecturer at the Atlanta Botanical Garden on April Fool's Day, which is a Tuesday. And then he'll be talking to our club on the Wednesday. And then bonus, we got him to stay until Saturday. He's going to be doing a demo here that will be paid demo. So limited to the first 50 people. It is going to be open to the public. We are going to announce it at his talk
on Tuesday. So, well, we'll figure that out. But I just wanted to let you know so you could mark your calendar. In May, we've got Olga Sogaz, who Gallo and Jeanette met because they went on her trip to Greece. So you can ask them any questions about that, but she will be coming to talk to our club. She has Smugtown Mushrooms up in Rochester, New York in May. Okay, well, you get to preview her. So, all right. We need help closing down the room. And I've actually decided after last month's meeting and this month's meeting, we need a whole IT team for our meeting. So please, anybody that thinks they can help us or wants to learn, because knowing how to do Zoom hybrid is a really valuable skill these days. So even if you don't know how to do it, then you can come learn. So we, Michael and I are working on checklists as we speak. So thank you so much, Britt, for coming. That was great information. And if you don't already subscribe to Fungi Magazine, you may want to consider. Thank you, everybody.